The war had been raging for months far beyond the human world. Entire planets had seen the clash of weapons, fire, and fear. Among the chaos, one man moved, not with a gun in his hand, but with a purpose that went beyond destruction. He was a war medic, someone who ran straight into danger while others ran away. He had seen too much death, too many friends fall, and he had learned that saving one life sometimes meant risking his own. Yet, he never hesitated. That was who he was, and that was why he was respected by both soldiers and civilians. Even enemies whispered his name in secret, knowing that his skill was unmatched and his courage unbreakable. It started on a battlefield that was barely recognizable as a planet. Craters scarred the ground, smoke clouded the sky, and the smell of burning metal and flesh filled the air. The human forces were outnumbered, but they held their ground, relying on clever tactics and sheer determination. The medic moved from one wounded soldier to another, ignoring the bullets that zipped past, ignoring the explosions that shook the ground beneath him. He had a small pack filled with medical supplies, but it contained something far more valuable: calm. Calm in the middle of chaos, which was rare in war. Soldiers depended on him not just for medicine, but for hope. During the battle, the enemy made a bold move. They had discovered his presence and decided that capturing him alive was more valuable than killing him. They wanted to interrogate him, to find out how humans were able to hold their ground against forces that were supposed to be unstoppable. They didn't know, of course, that the medic was only a man doing what he had trained for his whole life. He had no secret weapons or hidden plans. He simply knew people, knew how to treat wounds, and knew how to think fast when life and death hung in the balance. The capture happened in a flash. One moment he was kneeling over a wounded comrade, trying to stop the bleeding, and the next moment the ground shook and a net of strange energy shot down from above, trapping him like a bird in a cage. He struggled, but the net was stronger than anything he had ever faced. He realized immediately that these weren't ordinary soldiers. They were part of an alien force, and the net had properties that interfered with his strength, making it impossible to break free. Within seconds, he was lifted off the ground and carried into the belly of a massive spaceship that hovered silently above the battlefield. Inside, the atmosphere was cold and unfamiliar. The walls hummed with strange energy, and lights flickered in colors he had never seen before. He was surrounded by beings that looked nothing like humans, with sharp eyes, strange limbs, and expressions that were unreadable. They didn't speak at first. They only stared, their gaze heavy and full of judgment, as if deciding whether he was worth anything. He tried to appear calm, not showing fear, because fear would only make them think he was weak. He had faced death countless times, but this was different. He was far from home, alone among creatures whose motives he could not understand. The alien spoke finally, in a voice that resonated deep in his chest. It was a language he could not comprehend, but their intentions were clear. They were angry, and he was being judged. They saw him as a dangerous human, a threat that needed to be neutralized, but not destroyed. He had survived many battles, but he realized in that moment that this was no ordinary fight. They were planning something far worse than death. Without warning, they bound his hands and blindfolded him. The fabric was rough against his skin, and the world went dark. He could feel movement, the hum of machinery and the swish of something massive as he was carried through the ship. Time seemed to stretch, and he couldn't tell how far they were taking him. His mind raced, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Panic would do nothing. He remembered everything he had learned in years of battle: observe, wait, and survive. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew that survival depended on thinking faster than the enemy. Finally, the transport stopped. The blindfold was removed abruptly, and the first thing he saw was darkness, broken only by faint glowing eyes in the shadows. His heart skipped a beat. He was standing in a chamber that smelled of fire, ash, and something ancient. The heat was intense, and the ground beneath him felt rough and uneven, scarred like the battlefield he had left behind. Then he saw it. The dragon. It was bigger than anything he could have imagined. Its black scales reflected the dim light like shards of glass, and its eyes glowed with an intelligence that chilled him to the bone. Its wings were folded, But he could see the muscle beneath, the power that could crush him in an instant. The dragon moved slowly at first, circling him, its claws scraping the floor with a sound that made his stomach turn. He had seen dangerous creatures before, creatures that could kill in seconds. But this was something else entirely. It was as if the very concept of fear had taken shape and walked into the room. He did not scream. He did not run. He remembered what he always told himself in battle. Fear is a choice, and courage is action despite fear. He stood still, his eyes following the dragon's every move. He noticed the way it tilted its head, the way it sniffed the air, the slight twitch of its tail. He realized that the dragon was testing him, trying to understand if he was prey or something else. It had probably never faced a human like him before. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. He had no way of knowing. The dragon circled him, growled softly, and then stopped, watching him like a judge. He slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a small bandage, not for himself, but for the creature. He didn't know if it would help, but he had learned that most beings, no matter how dangerous, responded to care and respect. He moved slowly, speaking softly in the universal tone of calm that he had learned through years of treating terrified patients. The dragon watched, then sniffed the air around him, its nostrils flaring. Slowly, carefully, he wrapped the bandage around a scar on its foreleg, the only visible wound he could reach without risking attack. The dragon's reaction surprised him. It lowered its massive head and seemed to examine him more closely, its eyes glowing brighter. It didn't attack. It didn't roar. It simply watched. And in that moment, he felt a flicker of something extraordinary. The dragon was not mindless. It was intelligent. It could understand him in ways he could not yet grasp. And in that understanding, he saw a tiny sliver of hope. The alien guards outside the chamber were confused. They had thrown countless prisoners into the dragon's lair, before expecting them to die, but this one was different. He moved calmly, with a quiet confidence that no alien force had prepared for. They whispered among themselves, unsure if he would survive the night. But secretly, some of them wondered if he might even tame the beast. It was unheard of, impossible even, yet here he was, standing, breathing, and alive. As night fell on the alien ship, the human war medic did not sleep. He studied the dragon, learning its movements, understanding its patterns, and silently preparing for what might come next. He had survived the battlefield, the explosions, the blood, and the fear. This was just another challenge, another life-or-death puzzle that required patience, courage, and intelligence. And he was ready. He did not know if he would ever escape this place. He did not know if he would ever return home. But one thing was clear. He was not going to die in that chamber, not by alien hands, and not by the dragon's claws. He had a mission. He had purpose. And in the dark eyes of that legendary creature, he saw the beginning of a story that would change everything, not just for him, but for the humans, the aliens, and the creature itself. And so, alone in the chamber of the deadliest dragon, the human war medic took his first true breath of strategy, patience, and courage. He waited. The dragon waited, and the first spark of an impossible bond flickered quietly in the shadows, unnoticed by the aliens who thought they had already won. The chamber was silent except for the low rumble of the dragon's breathing. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, followed every movement of the human medic. He knew he could not afford a single mistake. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, and this legendary creature could end his life in an instant. Yet he did not flinch. He had been trained for moments like this, when fear threatened to freeze the mind. He focused instead on observation, learning the dragon's rhythms, its small habits, the way its tail flicked when it was annoyed, the way its nostrils flared when it detected unfamiliar scents. Time passed slowly. The human began to notice patterns. The dragon wasn't attacking because it was hungry, nor because it was confused. It was watching him, studying him, deciding whether he was worth killing or worth something else. That realization made the medic's mind race. He had treated countless humans in war, but this was entirely different. This was not about medicine. This was about survival, about intelligence and strategy. He realized that brute force alone would not save him. He would have to earn the dragon's respect. He moved carefully, inch by inch, testing the dragon's patience. He did not reach out suddenly. He did not make loud noises. Instead, he spoke softly in a calm, steady voice. Even though the dragon could not understand words, he knew that calmness could be sensed. Creatures, especially intelligent ones, reacted to energy, to intention. He carefully cleaned a small patch of dirt off the dragon's massive claw, showing that he could be gentle despite the danger. The dragon's eyes narrowed, watching him. It did not attack. It did not roar. It simply observed. Days began to blur. The medic had little food and the air was thick with heat and smoke, but he stayed alert. He created small routines, pacing slowly, testing how the dragon reacted to movement. He noticed that when he paused and stayed still, the dragon would relax slightly, lowering its massive head closer to the ground. That small gesture was progress. Every inch he gained in understanding was a victory, even if invisible to the alien guards outside. At night, when the chamber was quietest, the dragon would sometimes curl up slightly, its massive wings folding around it. The medic realized that the creature was not merely a killing machine. It had fears and discomforts like any living being. He began experimenting subtly, making gentle movements to show it that he meant no harm. Once he extended a hand slowly toward the dragon's side, brushing lightly against a scale. The dragon flinched at first, then froze. Slowly it lowered its body slightly, accepting the contact without aggression. The medic's heart raced, not from fear this time, but from hope. This was the first sign that they could communicate without words, that trust could begin to form. The alien guards outside were growing impatient. They whispered among themselves, confused and frustrated that the human had survived longer than any other prisoner. Most captives had been thrown into the chamber before him and were dead within minutes. Yet here he was, still alive, still moving, still breathing, still observing. Some of the guards began to argue quietly among themselves, wondering if perhaps this human was more than he appeared. They did not understand that survival sometimes depended not on strength, but on intelligence, patience, and respect. As days passed, the human medic noticed subtle changes in the dragon. Its eyes, once sharp and threatening, softened at moments. Its movements were less tense. It no longer circled him constantly, and sometimes it even allowed him to come closer than before. The medic realized that the dragon was curious. Curiosity, he knew, was the first step toward understanding, and understanding was the first step toward trust. He continued to speak softly, sometimes humming quietly, moving with deliberate care, letting the dragon see that he was not a threat. Then, something extraordinary happened. The dragon, alone with the medic in the chamber, made a sound unlike anything the human had ever heard. It was not a roar or growl, but a low melodic vibration that seemed almost like a voice. At first he froze, unsure if it was a threat or communication. The vibration pulsed through the air, resonating in a way that made his chest feel tight. Slowly he realized the sound carried meaning. It was a form of recognition, a test perhaps, or an invitation. He responded carefully, humming a steady tone, moving slowly toward the dragon's side. The creature did not move away. Instead, it tilted its massive head, watching him with bright, intelligent eyes. The human medic understood in that moment that they were beginning to communicate, not through words, but through presence, through energy, through actions. Every subtle gesture mattered. Every careful step was noticed. Every moment of calm patience built a bridge between them. One day he noticed the dragon had a wound, an old scar along its leg, jagged and swollen slightly. It must have been from a battle long ago, something the alien forces had failed to treat. He approached slowly, speaking in his calm, steady tone. The dragon flinched but did not retreat. The medic cleaned the wound carefully, using scraps from his pack and improvising bandages from cloth. He did not know if it would help, but he had learned that even a small act of care could change the energy in a tense room. The dragon watched, its glowing eyes steady, almost studying him as if judging his intentions. When he finished, the dragon did something completely unexpected. It lowered its head gently, allowing him to touch the wound again, almost like a silent thank you. The medic's heart skipped a beat. He realized that he had crossed an invisible line. The creature, feared across galaxies, was showing signs of trust. It was a monumental achievement, born not of fear or domination, but of patience, intelligence, and courage. The alien guards outside were baffled. They whispered nervously, unsure what they were seeing. No human had ever survived this long, and no human had ever come close to taming the dragon even slightly. Some guards began to question if the human's survival was luck, skill, or something else entirely. They did not know that what was happening was something no force could control, a bond forming between two intelligent beings. Days turned into weeks. The human medic and the dragon established a routine. He observed its behavior carefully, noting times when it was most alert, when it was relaxed, and when it was curious. He even began leaving small gestures like arranging stones or scratching marks to see how the dragon reacted. Slowly, the creature began to anticipate his movements, recognizing patterns, learning that the human's intentions were predictable in the best way. Trust was growing slowly but surely like a seed in the soil. One night, a storm of energy hit the chamber as the ship's systems malfunctioned. Lights flickered and the dragon grew tense, its massive body coiling defensively. The human medic remained calm. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible, speaking softly in the same tone he had used every day. The dragon, after initial flinches, began to relax slightly, following his rhythm. The medic realized something important. Even in chaos, calm presence could influence the most dangerous beings. It was a lesson he had learned on countless battlefields, but never as clearly as here in the lair of the deadliest dragon. By the end of the second week, a subtle understanding had formed between them. The dragon no longer saw him as prey. The human medic no longer saw it as an uncontrollable killing machine. They were learning to coexist, to observe, to understand. The alien guards outside were growing nervous. Their orders had been clear: kill the human if he showed weakness. Yet he showed no weakness. Instead, he showed patience, intelligence, and courage. The guards were beginning to see that something extraordinary was unfolding, something they could not predict or control. The medic realized that he could survive here, but he also understood that survival was not enough. He needed a plan. He needed to figure out how to use this bond, this understanding with the dragon, to his advantage. He studied the chamber, the layout, the possible exits, and the dragon's movements. He began thinking like a strategist, not just a medic, planning for the possibility of escape or negotiation. The dragon, he noticed, seemed to sense his thoughts, moving in ways that suggested awareness of his intentions. And so, in the dark, hot chamber of the deadliest dragon in the galaxy, a slow, quiet partnership began to form. Neither fully understood the other yet, but they both recognized strength, intelligence, and patience. The human war medic was not just surviving. He was learning, adapting, and slowly, imperceptibly, winning the trust of the creature everyone else feared. By the time the aliens realized what was happening, it might already be too late. The chamber felt different now. It was no longer just a prison filled with fear and danger. It had become a place of quiet understanding, of observation and cautious trust. The human war medic had learned to read the dragon's moods, to sense when it was curious, when it was tense, and when it was open to his approach. And the dragon, in turn, seemed to recognize that this human was not like the others. He did not attack. He did not provoke. He simply existed with patience, intelligence, and courage, qualities that the dragon had learned to respect. The bond between them was subtle, almost invisible to anyone watching. The alien guards outside could not understand it. They thought they had thrown a mere prisoner into the lair of a monster, expecting him to die in fear and agony. But the medic had no intention of dying quietly. He had survived countless battles, faced enemies far deadlier than these, and he understood one simple truth. Fear was a choice, and courage was action despite that fear. Every day he acted with patience, with careful observation, with small gestures that gradually convinced the dragon that he meant no harm. One day, he noticed that the dragon moved slower than usual. Its massive body seemed heavy, and the scales along its side looked dull, almost worn. There was a scar, deep and jagged, that ran along its flank. He had seen battle wounds before, but this was different. This wound had not healed properly. He could see the signs of infection, the irritation along the edge of the cut. The dragon did not allow anyone to touch it, but now, standing carefully at a safe distance, he realized that he could help. He spoke softly, even though he knew the dragon could not understand words. His tone was calm, steady, and deliberate. Slowly he moved closer, showing that he would not strike or harm. The dragon watched him, its glowing eyes narrowing, testing, questioning, deciding whether to trust him or not. The human medic knelt on one knee, keeping his body low and non-threatening. He extended a hand slowly and touched the edge of the wound. The dragon flinched at first, a subtle movement, but then froze as if waiting to see what he would do next. With steady hands, he cleaned the wound, using scraps from his own supplies. He improvised with strips of cloth, tying them carefully around the affected area. Every movement was deliberate, gentle, and respectful. The dragon's eyes never left him, glowing softly, watching every action. He did not rush. He knew that rushing would break the fragile trust they had built over days. He worked slowly, quietly, giving the dragon time to decide whether to accept this strange human's care. And then it happened. The dragon lowered its massive head slightly, allowing the medic to touch it more freely. It did not roar, it did not snap, it simply stayed still, letting him tend to its wound. The human's heart raced, but not from fear, from excitement. This was a breakthrough. The deadliest creature in the galaxy, feared by entire civilizations, was showing signs of trust. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A bond was forming, built on patience, courage, and care. The alien guards outside were growing uneasy. They whispered to each other, confused and frustrated. They had thrown countless prisoners into the chamber, and none had survived. None had come close to taming the dragon even slightly, yet here was a human, alive and moving freely, working alongside the creature they had assumed would kill him instantly. Some of the guards began to doubt whether the dragon would ever attack him. Others muttered that this human must be hiding some secret, some trick. They did not realize that there was no trick. There was only understanding. Over the next few days, the human continued to observe and interact with the dragon. He learned its patterns, the small movements that indicated mood or intent. He noticed the way it tilted its head when curious, the way its tail flicked when irritated, the slight hiss that warned of aggression. Every detail mattered. Every subtle gesture built more trust. The dragon, for its part, began to allow more contact, to relax slightly in his presence. It was a quiet transformation, almost invisible, but the human could feel it. He was learning not just to survive, but to communicate in a way that transcended language. Then something extraordinary occurred. While sitting quietly near the dragon, the medic felt a vibration in the air, a subtle pulse that he had not noticed before. It was not a sound, not exactly. It was more like a mental presence, a connection, a sense that the dragon was aware of his thoughts and intentions. At first he was startled. He had never experienced anything like this. But as he concentrated, he realized that the dragon was trying to communicate, not through words, but through awareness. It was as if it could sense his calm, his patience, his intention to help rather than harm. This realization changed everything. The human now understood that their bond was no longer one-sided. The dragon was actively engaging, observing, responding to him in ways that were almost like conversation. He began to test it carefully, making small gestures, moving slowly, speaking softly, and watching how the dragon reacted. Sometimes it would respond immediately, changing posture, relaxing a muscle, or moving closer. Sometimes it would wait, watching, calculating, testing him. Each interaction was a lesson, each response a confirmation that trust was growing. One day he noticed that the dragon seemed restless, pacing slightly, its massive claws scraping the ground. He understood that it was testing him, pushing boundaries to see how he would react. He remained calm, kneeling, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He spoke softly, humming quietly, and slowly extended his hand. The dragon paused, then leaned slightly toward him, allowing a touch. It was a small gesture, but monumental. The human realized that they had reached a new level of understanding. The dragon was no longer just a threat. It was a partner in a silent, cautious relationship. The alien guards were increasingly worried. They whispered among themselves, realizing that their orders might not be enough to control the situation. The human was alive, moving freely, interacting with the dragon in ways no one had predicted. They could not understand how he had survived, let alone why the dragon seemed to tolerate him. Some began to fear that the situation was slipping out of control, that this human had found a way to turn the deadliest creature in the galaxy into an ally. The human medic knew that survival alone was not enough. He needed a plan. He began studying the chamber carefully, memorizing every corner, every shadow, every possible exit. He observed the dragon's reactions, noting when it was alert, when it was relaxed, and when it seemed willing to cooperate. He realized that if they were going to survive, if they were going to escape, he would need to rely on the dragon's intelligence and strength. And he also realized something else. The dragon was beginning to trust him enough to follow guidance. The next breakthrough came when he discovered that the dragon seemed to respond to his mental focus. Not words, not gestures, but intention. When he concentrated on moving in a certain direction, the dragon would shift its massive body accordingly. When he focused on calm, the dragon's breathing slowed. It was as if they were communicating in a language beyond speech, a connection built on thought, observation, and trust. The human's mind raced with possibilities. If he could harness this connection, if he could guide the dragon, then escape might not only be possible, it might be achievable without violence. Days turned into weeks. The human and the dragon developed a rhythm. He would approach cautiously, tend to small needs, observe patterns, and move slowly through the chamber. The dragon would respond, sometimes with subtle shifts, sometimes with more noticeable movements. They began to anticipate each other's actions. The human learned which gestures calmed the dragon and which triggered tension. The dragon learned that the human's presence meant safety, care, and careful strategy. What began as fear and caution had transformed into understanding, a silent partnership that neither the aliens nor anyone else could have predicted. The human's patience and intelligence were being rewarded. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a strategist, a caregiver, and a partner to the most feared creature in the galaxy. And the dragon, for its part, had discovered that this human was unlike any other. He did not attack. He did not provoke. He acted with calm, deliberate purpose. He showed courage without recklessness, patience without weakness, and respect without fear. Together they had begun to form a bond that could change everything. In the dark, hot chamber filled with the smell of smoke and ash, the human war medic and the legendary dragon sat quietly, observing each other. The alien guards outside whispered nervously, realizing that their orders had failed. No human had ever survived this long, and no human had ever begun to tame the dragon. But the medic had done more than survive. He had created understanding, trust, and the first signs of a true partnership. And in that quiet, tense chamber, both human and dragon sensed that their story was only beginning. Days in the chamber passed quietly, but the calm was different now. It was no longer tense, fearful silence. Instead, there was a subtle rhythm, a mutual awareness between the human and the dragon. The human war medic had learned to read the dragon's every gesture, every twitch of its tail, every subtle shift of its massive body. He could tell when it was curious, when it was alert, and when it was ready to accept his presence. And the dragon, in turn, seemed to respond not just to his movements, but to his thoughts, his intentions, his careful, deliberate approach. The human realized something extraordinary. This dragon was not just a creature of instinct and power, it was intelligent in ways that few could understand. It had memory, it had patience, and it had a capacity for understanding that rivaled that of humans in some ways. He had suspected it before, but now he could see it clearly. This was not just a beast. This was a thinking, feeling, aware being capable of judgment and choice, and for the first time, he began to sense that it might even be willing to cooperate with him. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. The dragon began following his movements when he walked through the chamber. It adjusted its massive body to give him space, its eyes tracking him carefully, but without hostility. The human tested the limits, moving closer, speaking softly, touching a scale here or a claw there, always observing, always careful. The dragon flinched at first, then held still. A connection was forming, a silent agreement that neither would harm the other unless provoked. One evening, as the dim lights flickered across the chamber, the human noticed a change in the dragon's behavior. Its eyes glowed brighter than usual, and it let out a low rumble, not threatening, but almost like a voice trying to communicate. He paused, listening carefully, tuning into the subtle vibrations in the air. For the first time, he sensed that the dragon might be able to understand him in ways beyond physical gestures. It was as if it could sense his thoughts, his intentions, the careful strategy behind every movement. He began experimenting carefully. He would focus on a simple idea, such as moving toward a corner of the chamber, and the dragon would shift its massive body slightly, almost like it understood where he wanted to go. It was subtle but unmistakable. Slowly, they began to develop a method of communication, not with words but with awareness and shared intention. Each movement, each gesture, each calm breath became a way to connect. The dragon's initial aggression was fading, replaced by curiosity and cautious cooperation. The human realized that this bond was not just useful for survival. It could be a key to escape. If he could trust the dragon and the dragon could trust him, then together they might find a way out of this alien prison. But he knew it would not be easy. The chamber was heavily guarded, and the alien forces had created barriers and traps that no human could overcome alone. He needed the dragon's strength, its intelligence, and its willingness to cooperate. And more importantly, he needed to maintain the fragile trust they had built over weeks of careful interaction. Over the next days, he began small experiments. He would move toward a wall or a corner and watch how the dragon responded. Sometimes it mirrored his movements, shifting slightly to give him space or to indicate readiness. Sometimes it waited, watching, testing him as if asking silently, "Can I trust you completely?" He learned to respond slowly, deliberately, always maintaining calm, always showing respect. Each successful interaction strengthened the bond. Each failure taught him patience. One night, as he rested near the dragon's massive body, he felt something unusual. A pulse not of the air or the floor, but something deeper. It was as if the dragon was reaching out, testing the human's mind, probing his intentions. At first he was startled. He had never experienced anything like this before. But then he remembered all the battles he had survived, all the times he had faced impossible odds. He focused, calming his thoughts, sending a clear intention. "I mean no harm. I want to help. I want us to survive." The response was immediate. The dragon's body relaxed slightly, the tension in its muscles easing. Its eyes, glowing softly, seemed to acknowledge him. For the first time, he felt that the dragon was actively choosing to cooperate with him, not out of instinct or fear, but out of understanding. It was a silent agreement, a shared purpose forming between them. With this newfound cooperation, the human began planning more boldly. He studied the chamber in detail, memorizing every wall, every shadow, every potential exit. He observed the guards, noting their patterns, their schedules, their weaknesses. And he tested the dragon's reactions, moving toward different areas, guiding it with careful gestures and focused intention. The dragon followed, its massive body responding in ways that showed both understanding and willingness. Together, they were becoming a team. The alien guards, meanwhile, were growing increasingly nervous. They whispered among themselves, realizing that their prisoner was surviving in ways no human ever had. They could not understand how he had gained the dragon's cooperation. Some speculated that he must have some secret power, some hidden weapon. Others muttered about luck or divine intervention. They did not realize that what was happening could not be forced or controlled. It was something extraordinary. Trust and understanding forming between two intelligent beings who were supposed to be mortal enemies. As the days passed, the human and the dragon's cooperation deepened. He began leaving small signals for the dragon, subtle gestures that indicated movement, direction, or caution. The dragon responded consistently, moving to give him space, blocking threats, or alerting him to danger. They developed a rhythm, a silent communication that made survival not just possible but increasingly probable. He realized that this was more than a bond. It was a partnership. Together they could face dangers that neither could survive alone. Then one day the dragon revealed something the human had never anticipated. While resting near a shadowed corner of the chamber, the creature leaned closer, its massive head near the human's shoulder. And then, in a way that seemed almost impossible, he sensed a thought. Not words, not sound, but a direct awareness of intention. The dragon recognized him. It knew who he was. It knew the value of his courage, the skill of his mind, and the depth of his experience. It understood that he was not merely a prisoner. He was someone remarkable, someone capable of thinking, planning, and surviving where others would fail. The human's mind raced. If the dragon could recognize him, if it understood his intentions, then the possibilities were enormous. Escape was no longer a distant hope, it was within reach if carefully planned. But he also understood the risks. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and the fragile trust could be destroyed. He needed patience, intelligence, and careful coordination. Every step had to be deliberate. Every gesture had to reinforce the bond they had built. Over the next week, they continued their silent training. The human tested the dragon's awareness, moving in different directions, adjusting pace, signaling caution, and observing responses. The dragon responded consistently, showing not just intelligence but a willingness to cooperate. It was as if they were rehearsing for something larger, a plan that had yet to be revealed. The alien guards outside could only watch helplessly, unable to predict or control what was unfolding. Finally, the human realized that the dragon was ready. It was alert, responsive, and willing to act with him. The bond they had forged through patience, courage, and intelligence had reached a point where cooperation was possible. He could guide the dragon, and the dragon could respond, creating opportunities that had been impossible before. Together, they could turn the prison into a place of strategy, and perhaps even escape. As he sat near the dragon, feeling the subtle rise and fall of its massive chest, he knew that everything had changed. What had begun as fear and survival had become partnership and understanding. The dragon was no longer just a deadly creature. It was a thinking, aware, and willing ally. And for the first time since being thrown into this chamber, the human war medic felt hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope for victory, for freedom, and for something extraordinary that neither he nor the dragon had ever imagined. In the quiet heat of the chamber, a new chapter was beginning. The human and the dragon were no longer prisoner and beast. They were partners, allies, and something more. A team that could challenge the expectations of the galaxy itself. And though the alien guards remained unaware, the stage was being set for a series of events that would change everything. Not just for the human, not just for the dragon, but for everyone who believed that the deadliest forces were unstoppable. The human war medic had spent weeks learning the dragon, understanding it and slowly earning its trust. He knew that trust was fragile, built over careful observation, patience, and consistent calmness. Now, for the first time, he could sense that the dragon was ready to act with him, not just tolerate him. Survival was no longer the only goal. Escape was possible, but it would require careful planning, perfect timing, and complete cooperation between the human and the massive, intelligent creature. He began by studying the chamber in greater detail. He memorized the layout, the locations of walls and exits, and the areas where the alien guards patrolled. Every corner, every shadow, every potential obstacle was noted. He paid attention to the sounds of the ship, the humming of energy, the occasional footsteps in the distance. Every pattern mattered. He realized that even small mistakes could cost them both their lives. But with the dragon as an ally, he had an advantage that no other human had ever possessed. Next, he tested the dragon's readiness. He would make small movements, signaling for it to follow or wait, and the dragon responded consistently. Sometimes it would shift its massive body, blocking the human from danger. Other times it would move toward a threat, allowing the human to move safely. These small exercises built confidence, and each successful interaction reinforced the silent communication between them. The human could sense the dragon's awareness, and the dragon seemed to sense his intentions. Together they were learning to act as a single unit. The alien guards continued to watch, increasingly baffled. They had expected the human to die or to provoke the dragon into attacking. Neither had happened. The human moved with calm, deliberate confidence, and the dragon responded in ways no one could have predicted. The guards whispered among themselves, growing nervous. Some speculated that the human had a secret weapon, while others wondered if he possessed some form of mental power. The truth was simpler and more extraordinary. Trust, patience, and understanding. The human realized that their escape would have to be coordinated precisely. He needed the dragon's strength and intelligence to bypass barriers, evade guards, and move through areas that would have been impossible for a human alone. He began to plan routes, mapping each corridor, each doorway, and each potential point of conflict. The dragon's movements would have to be timed perfectly with his own. One mistake, one hesitation, and the entire plan could fail. To prepare, he continued small exercises. He would signal the dragon to shift its position, to move closer, or to pause. The dragon responded consistently, showing not just intelligence but willingness. It was learning his gestures and patterns as much as he was learning its. Each day the human pushed the limits slightly, testing both the dragon's patience and its ability to follow instructions. They were rehearsing, building confidence and coordination. By now the bond between them was almost unbreakable. They trusted each other in ways neither had ever experienced before. Finally the day arrived. The human had memorized the guards' rotations, the ship's energy surges, and the positions of all potential obstacles. He knew that one wrong step could cost both their lives. He crouched beside the dragon, speaking softly, humming quietly, focusing on calm intention. The dragon responded, shifting its massive head, its glowing eyes fixed on him, muscles tensed but controlled. They were ready. He gave the first signal. Slowly, carefully, he began moving toward the far corner of the chamber, keeping low and deliberate. The dragon followed, its massive body moving silently despite its size. The alien guards outside noticed, but they could not predict what was happening. The human moved with precision, the dragon responding to each subtle gesture, each focused thought. Together they began their silent advance toward freedom. The first obstacle was a doorway guarded by two aliens. The human signaled subtly, indicating caution. The dragon crouched, lowering its massive body, making itself less noticeable. The guards approached, unaware of the silent partnership unfolding before them. The human waited until they were momentarily distracted, then moved swiftly, the dragon following perfectly. The guards were startled by the speed and precision, but it was too late. The human and the dragon had passed through, moving deeper into the ship. Next came a corridor filled with traps, energy barriers that would fry any human instantly. The human signaled the dragon to move carefully, to wait, to adjust. The dragon leaned low, its massive wings folding to avoid the barriers, following the human's subtle guidance. Step by step they navigated the corridor. The human's heart raced, but he kept his breathing steady. One wrong move could be fatal, but the dragon's awareness and responsiveness gave him confidence. They reached the other side unharmed, a silent victory that strengthened their bond even more. As they continued, the alien guards became increasingly aware that something extraordinary was happening. They attempted to block the path, calling orders and raising weapons. But the dragon acted quickly, moving with precision and restraint. It did not attack recklessly. It simply positioned itself to block threats, using its size and presence to protect the human. The human moved carefully, following the path they had rehearsed, coordinating every movement with the dragon. Together they were unstoppable, not through violence alone, but through strategy, trust, and cooperation. At one point they reached a massive gate, the final barrier between them and freedom. It was guarded heavily, reinforced with alien technology designed to withstand attack. The human paused, observing the patterns, noting the timing of patrols and energy pulses. He signaled to the dragon, which leaned close, its massive eyes focused. With a shared intention, they began their approach. The human used tools from his pack, disabling a small control panel while the dragon shifted its body to shield him from view. Every second mattered. Every movement was deliberate. Finally, the gate opened. The human and the dragon moved through, barely noticed by the guards who were caught off guard by the precision and coordination of the escape. Once beyond the gate, they reached the outer corridor, leading to the open sky outside the ship. The human could see it now. The vast expanse of space, the possibility of freedom, and the life that awaited beyond the alien fortress. He felt a surge of relief, but he did not stop. He knew that the final moments would be the most dangerous, and he needed the dragon's cooperation until they were completely safe. The dragon responded, moving steadily alongside him, aware of every subtle signal. They reached the exit, and the human carefully guided it through the narrow opening. Outside, the vacuum of space awaited, but he had prepared. He had tools to create a temporary protective shield, enough to allow the dragon and himself to move safely to a nearby escape pod. Step by step they advanced, the dragon's massive body following exactly as he had guided. When they finally reached the pod, the human prepared it for launch. The dragon, sensing the urgency, moved into position, its massive wings folding as the human activated the controls. The pod lifted off, and for the first time in weeks the human felt the weight of relief. They were not yet free of danger, but they had achieved the impossible, escaping the chamber of the deadliest dragon together. Inside the pod, the human and the dragon were finally safe, at least temporarily. The human turned to observe the creature beside him, and he saw something he had never expected. Not fear, not aggression, but trust, awareness, and even a hint of understanding. This was no longer just a dragon. It was an ally, a partner, and a friend. The bond they had forged in the chamber of danger had carried them through impossible odds, and now it would continue as they prepared for the challenges ahead. The human thought about the alien guards who had underestimated him, about the fortress they had escaped, and about the battles yet to come. But he knew one thing for certain. Alone, he might have failed. But with the dragon at his side, intelligent, aware, and willing to cooperate, they had achieved what no human or creature had done before. The partnership that had begun as necessity had become something extraordinary. a silent bond that would change the course of their journey and the lives of everyone who believed the dragon to be untamable. As the pod moved further from the alien ship, the human war medic reflected on what had happened. He had survived impossible odds not through strength alone, but through patience, intelligence, and courage. He had earned the trust of a creature feared across galaxies, and together, they had turned a deadly prison into a path to freedom. The journey was far from over, but for the first time he felt hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope for victory, for freedom, and for something greater than either he or the dragon had ever imagined. In the silence of space, with the stars stretching endlessly ahead, the human and the dragon sat together in the pod. Neither spoke, yet both understood. They had faced death, danger, and fear, and emerged alive not through force alone, but through trust, patience, and understanding. And as the stars passed by outside the window, a new chapter began, one filled with possibilities, challenges, and the promise of freedom that had once seemed impossible. The pod drifted silently through the cold emptiness of space, carrying the human war medic and the legendary dragon far from the alien fortress that had once been their prison. For weeks they had survived impossible odds, building a bond based on trust, patience, and courage. Now, as the stars stretched endlessly around them, the human felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. Freedom was within reach, but he also knew that challenges remained. Escape was only the beginning. The dragon, massive and powerful, rested beside him. Its breathing was steady, almost relaxed, though its glowing eyes continued to scan their surroundings. The human could feel the intelligence behind those eyes, the awareness of every movement, every vibration, every shadow in space. They had been through fire together, both figuratively and literally, and now they shared a silent understanding that transcended words. What had begun as fear and survival had transformed into partnership, respect, and even friendship. The human began thinking about the world outside the fortress. Civilizations across galaxies feared the dragon. Rumors and legends had grown over centuries, portraying it as unstoppable and deadly. But he now knew the truth. The dragon was not a mindless weapon. It was intelligent, capable of thought and emotion, and above all, capable of trust. That realization gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He would not just survive. He would show the galaxy what courage, understanding, and partnership could achieve. Their immediate goal was safety. The pod's shields were temporary, enough to move them away from the immediate threat, but not enough to keep them safe forever. The human studied the control panel carefully, noting energy levels, navigation systems, and propulsion settings. He began charting a course toward a nearby planet with resources for repair, a place where they could regain strength, plan their next move, and avoid pursuit. The dragon, sensing his intentions, shifted slightly closer, its massive head following his movements, as if offering silent support. As they approached the planet, the human realized the first real test of cooperation lay ahead. The landing would be dangerous. The planet's atmosphere was thick, and navigating the pod through it required careful coordination. The dragon, despite its massive size, seemed to understand the challenge. The human gave subtle signals, moving his hands, focusing his thoughts, and guiding the creature's attention to the task at hand. The dragon responded instantly, adjusting its position, lowering its body in the pod and keeping its massive wings folded. Step by step, they prepared for descent. The landing was tense but successful. The pod touched the surface with a controlled crash that left it intact but shaken. Dust rose into the air, and the human quickly assessed the damage. The dragon shifted slightly, checking the surroundings, alert to any threats. The planet was quiet, at least for now, giving them a moment to catch their breath. The human climbed from the pod, moving slowly and deliberately, signaling to the dragon that it was safe to follow. The dragon obeyed, stepping carefully, its massive claws leaving deep impressions in the soil. Once on solid ground, the human and dragon took stock. The pod was damaged but repairable. Supplies were minimal, but there were resources nearby. Stones, minerals, and raw materials that could be adapted for their needs. The human began planning repairs, thinking about tools, energy sources, and ways to stabilize the pod. The dragon remained close, alert, and aware, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. It was as if the creature understood the importance of preparation, of planning, and of vigilance. Together, they were a team not just of survival but of strategy. Over the next days, the human worked on the pod while the dragon helped in its own way. It used its massive strength to move debris, clear heavy obstacles, and shield him from environmental dangers. The human marveled at how seamlessly they worked together. What had begun as a fragile bond born from fear had grown into a true partnership, one that combined intelligence, strength, and trust in ways he had never imagined possible. He knew that the galaxy had underestimated them both. Meanwhile, the alien forces had not forgotten them. Reports of the pod's disappearance had reached the fortress and a search had begun. But the human and the dragon were careful, avoiding detection, using the planet's terrain and the dragon's awareness to stay hidden. Every movement was calculated. Every signal between them, subtle but precise, ensured they stayed one step ahead. For the first time, the human understood the true meaning of trust. Not blind faith, but complete reliance on the other's awareness, intelligence, and cooperation. Then came the moment of revelation. While exploring the planet's surface, the human discovered a hidden canyon, filled with strange minerals and natural formations that could be used for advanced repairs. The dragon moved beside him, its massive presence both protective and helpful. He realized that the planet offered more than survival. It offered opportunity. They could rebuild, strategize, and prepare for the next phase of their journey. And most importantly, they could demonstrate to the galaxy that the impossible, friendship and cooperation between human and dragon, was possible. The human worked tirelessly, using his medical precision and tactical thinking to repair the pod. He reinforced its shields, repaired the propulsion system, and created new systems for monitoring environmental hazards. The dragon remained vigilant, alert to every movement, every sound, every vibration. When the human rested, the dragon remained awake, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. Together, they had become a unit that combined human ingenuity with alien power. Every challenge faced had strengthened the bond, making them more than the sum of their parts. News of their escape began to spread across nearby systems. Civilizations that had feared the dragon were astonished to hear that a human had survived its lair and now moved alongside it as a partner. Rumors turned into stories, stories into legends. The human realized that their journey was no longer just about survival. It was about changing perception, about showing that courage, intelligence, and trust could overcome fear and misunderstanding. The dragon, too, seemed aware of this shift, its behavior calm but proud, almost like it understood the significance of their actions. With the pod repaired and their confidence renewed, the human prepared for the next stage. They would leave the planet, travel to allies, and confront the forces that had imprisoned them. But he knew that victory would not come from brute strength alone. It would come from strategy, trust, and the silent partnership they had forged. The dragon, massive and intelligent, was no longer a weapon of fear. It was an ally, a friend, and a crucial part of every plan. The human reflected on how far they had come. Weeks ago, he had been thrown into a chamber of fear and death, surrounded by alien forces and the deadliest creature in the galaxy. Now he had escaped, built trust with the dragon, and transformed a hopeless situation into opportunity. The experience had tested his patience, intelligence, and courage, but it had also shown him something remarkable: that understanding and cooperation could change even the most dangerous circumstances. As they prepared to launch into space again, the human gave a final signal to the dragon. The creature responded instantly, its massive wings shifting slightly, its body poised for movement. They moved together into the pod, ready for the journey ahead. The stars awaited them, full of danger and possibility. But now, they faced the unknown not as prisoner and beast, but as partners, united in trust, intelligence, and purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult. They would face enemies, challenges, and obstacles that neither had encountered before. But the human war medic no longer feared what lay ahead. With the dragon at his side, they had proven that courage, patience, and understanding could overcome even the deadliest forces. They were not just survivors. They were pioneers of a new kind of partnership, one that could change the galaxy's understanding of power, fear, and trust. As the pod moved through the vast emptiness of space, the human looked at the dragon beside him. Its glowing eyes met his, and in that moment words were unnecessary. They had faced death together, survived impossible odds, and forged a bond that no alien force could break. The future was uncertain, full of danger and challenge, but for the first time the human felt truly ready. Together they would face whatever came next, not as prisoner and beast, but as allies, friends, and something greater than either had been alone. In the silence of space, surrounded by stars, the human and the dragon moved forward. Their story, born of danger, fear, and impossible odds, had become something extraordinary. A tale of trust, courage, and partnership that would echo across galaxies. And though the journey was far from over, they faced it together, confident that whatever lay ahead, they would face it not alone, but side by side. The galaxy had expected fear and destruction, but what it would see instead was something far more powerful. Intelligence, patience, courage, and trust, the unbreakable bond between a human war medic and the deadliest dragon alive. And that bond, forged in the heat of danger and tested in the crucible of survival, would define the rest of their lives, and perhaps the future of the galaxy itself.